Ready to roll? Nice. I think that clock's about 30 seconds slow, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. Welcome everybody to our May 9th regular meeting of the West Turlock Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Agency Board of Directors. I call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Members of the public attending virtually will have the opportunity to provide public comment via the webinar or phone features. For those participating via Zoom, please click the raise your hand button. For those participating via phone, please dial *9 on your keypad. Let's say the flag salute. Stand and pledge allegiance. Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jennifer, give the roll call of members.
Director Bixel?
Here and none. Here.
Perfect. Alternate Director Casey?
Here.
Director Crooker?
Here.
Director Espinoza?
Present.
Alternate Director Lindo?
Here.
Director Ochoa?
Here.
And Chair Alamo.
Here.
There we have a quorum.
Thank you for that. Now, ask if there's anybody interested in public comment to address any item not listed on the agenda. Anybody online? Thank you. Moving on. Usually only Michael Clipper is dressed up like this, but we do have a special certificate of appreciation. So I did wear a jacket for this evening. If I could get Michael Cook to stand up and say a few words.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll say a few words, and there's a certificate of appreciation for Debbie, which you can present after the fact. So Debbie graduated from Lompoc High School, went to UOP to become a pharmacist, halfway through switched majors, became a civil engineer. After graduating from UOP, she got a job as an engineering tech with Turlock Irrigation District on October 12th, 1992. And it wasn't long after she started working there that her supervisor tasked her with studying groundwater issues in the region after coming out of that 87 to 91 drought and increased development in the eastern portion of the subbasin. And then some of us may remember, but in the early 90s, the state passed AB 3030, the Groundwater Management Act. And Debbie helped put together what was called the Turlock Groundwater Basin Association, kind of a precursor to this group, and also worked on the first Turlock Groundwater Management Plan. And that was developed in 1997. Her career developed with Turlock Irrigation District. She worked on a number of groundbreaking issues, conjunctive use, agricultural water management plans, various regulations dealing with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And in 2004 became the district's water resources manager. And as you know, for the past decade, she's been spearheading our efforts to comply with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, and helping with spearheading the development of the groundwater plan and being the basin's first official plan manager. And not many of you may know, but Debbie, not only is she a pioneer in the groundwater arena, but she's a true pioneer for women in engineering. She was the first female engineer at TID to become a licensed engineer when she passed her professional engineer exam in February of 1997. On the personal side, Debbie is married to Chris. They have 3 children, Oliver, Sarah, and Chelsea. And in retirement, Debbie will spend more time at her cabin in the mountains. And she has a number of hobbies, mainly crafts and things like that. So again, Debbie, this is, Chairmo has a certificate of appreciation for your many years of service to the groundwater issues in the region. And we wish you well in your retirement.
Debbie, you've been the lifeblood of this groundwater and our whole association and our whole community here in the Turlock Subbasin. And we'd love to hear a couple of words you have to say.
Thank you. And thank you for your trust in me in doing the work that I've so passionately done over the years. I really appreciate all of the support that I was given as I pursued developing the GSP and working on groundwater related issues. And I'm excited for the future of the region. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Congratulations. Come on up and I'll Certificate of appreciation by the Board of Directors of the West Turlock Groundwater Sustainability Agency in recognition of your time and effort serving as Turlock Subbasin Plan Manager and Technical Advisory Committee member while furthering groundwater management and sustainability in the Turlock Subbasin. Congratulations.
The communications team, but I can take a picture.
Perfect.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Enjoy. We do have cookies. Yes, so we got cookies in the back, so I told Debbie she has to take the rest of them if you guys don't eat them, so we gotta help her out with those. Okay, agenda item number F, staff updates. Budget update, Michael Clipper.
Good evening, everyone. For the West Turlock account for the April 30th ending, we had $1,176,659.83. For the basin, for the same time frame, we had $791,086.49. Working with Michael, and we'll kind of get a reconciliation of everything because we're kind of looking at stuff that we'll probably be spending that on in the near future. So, any questions?
Questions? Okay, thanks for the update.
Thank you.
Technical Advisory Committee update, Michael Cook.
I'm gonna pass on my update. We have a lot to go over tonight. We've been busy updating the GSP or revising the GSP, so I'll cede my time and we'll go over to the consultant.
Excellent. Agenda item G, consent calendar. I think we only have one item on that consent calendar, the minutes of the February 8th special meeting. Are there any questions? So moved. Excellent. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, thank you. And probably moving to second. Any further discussion, comments, concerns? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion passes. Agenda item number 1. Turlock Subbasin Plan Manager, Michael Cook.
Yes, Chairman, the Sigma regulations require us to have a designated plan manager who is the kind of the interface between DWR and the basin. So if they have a question or they need data, they come to the plan manager first, and so they're the point of contact. As we just found out, Debbie is retiring, and I was nominated to be the new plan manager. We had a meeting with the East Turlock folks and also took that to the joint TAC, and it was unfortunately the recommendation of the joint TAC that I be the new plan manager. So that's a recommendation to you.
Can follow in Debbie's shoes.
No, but I would do my best. She's got really small feet.
Uh,
Do you know her cabin number?
We told David to go work for DWR to help grease the skid.
there you go. Anybody want to move this item forward?
Second.
Perfect. Moved and seconded. Any further comments or questions? Here none's a resolution. Go ahead and call the vote.
Director Bixel,
Yes.
alternate director Casey,
Yes.
Director Crooker,
Yes.
Director Espinoza,
Yes.
alternate director Lindo,
Yes.
Director Ochoa,
Yes.
and Chair Alamo.
Yes.
Thank
Excellent. Moving right along, fiscal year 2024-25 operating budget. Michael Cook again.
Yeah, so our operating procedures require us to have a budget by June 30th. So ordinarily we'd be approving that tonight. But we do have a special meeting for July 11th to work on the revise or adopt hopefully the revised GSP. My recommendation is to move the budget to that date and operate under a motion to continue operate under our existing budget. I'd like to have a little bit more time to incorporate into the new projects or programs that we have to put in the new GSP or the revised GSP into a budget. We're still working out some of those numbers and making sure that we're in sync with what the East Turlock folks we're working on together with the new revised GSP. We did have to we had to move some funds around last year to pay for the revised GSP. We didn't budget quite enough money, but we're well within the overall budget. So although we move money between lines, we're well within the overall budget for this year. And we're developing a reserve to help us put some new monitoring wells in. So I'll be providing the TAC with a revised or a proposed budget next Tuesday for their consideration. And the goal is to keep the funding at the same level as last year. So we're trying not to increase the funding commitments from the member agencies, but move money around between the various items to make sure we still address what needs to be addressed in the revised GSP, the new programs. You'll hear about well mitigation, but making sure we're keeping on top of everything else we have to do to implement our GSP. So the goal is to have a status quo budget for next year, maybe some slight tweaks in terms of where we spend the money, but the overall spending amount should be the same. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Forward to the July 11th date.
I'll make a motion. Second.
Perfect, has been properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Agenda item 3. GSP second annual report. Michael.
Yeah, the consultant will be making this presentation, but it actually is our third annual report. We submitted our first annual report before we even submitted our GSP or at the same time, so I always get confused. So it's actually our third annual report. So I'll hand over to Liz at this time.
Hi, thanks so much. My name is Liz Elliott with Todd Groundwater. And I just want to make sure the presentation, that you have the presentation, you can show it. I don't see it.
We don't see it either, so that's good, Liz.
Do I need to share my screen or is it being loaded on your end?
Give us 1 second.
Sure.
I think you can share your screen now, it looks like.
Okay, I will.
From our IT staff, it's showing properly back there, just not displaying out there. So they were going to try one more time before we move to an alternate solution.
Okay, so I'll hang on and I won't share yet. It's my
Okay.
understanding.
Thank you, Liz. Give us just a minute. We may
Okay.
rely on you, but I'm not sure just yet.
Okay. I see it. Thank you. Okay, I'll get started. So again, thanks for having. Hello, sorry.
We got you. You're all set. We're seeing the screen. We're great.
Okay, can you hear and see me clearly? Yep.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, okay. Well, again, thanks for having me. So we, Todd Groundwater, prepared this third GSP annual report for water year 2023, along with Woodard and Curran. And Dominic Amador of Woodard, from Woodard and Curran, is also here, and we will be co-presenting today. So next slide, please. So we submitted this report at the end of March, prior to the April 1st deadline. And this annual report for water year 2023 covered the period of October 2022 through September 2023. During this time period, it included 2 GSP monitoring events, one that took place in the fall of 2022 and one that took place in the spring of 2023. This annual report includes a model update for water year 2023, which Dominic will be presenting. It includes water level analyses, a water quality analysis, subsidence update, and an update on projects and management actions. And I will pass it over to Dominic for the next slide.
Good evening, everyone. So as Liz said, we've over the past few months, we've been working to submit and develop the GSP annual report. But as part of that, we did a model update to support us in the ability to kind of quantify a lot of the dynamics, a lot of the water budgets that are within the basin. And so the core of that is going to be precipitation. And as we all know, 2023 was an incredibly wet year. So we were very fortunate to have all the beneficial impacts from that, whether that is our surface water supply, percolation of native natural water, stream aquifer interaction, where we had a lot of the beneficiaries of a large source of water this past year. As you can see here, in 2023, we had about 22 inches of precipitation within the basin, and you can see it's double or even triple what we have been seeing over the past couple of years. And so this helped us receive some much needed reprieve from the past couple of years here that you can see in the 2021, 2022, we had a very critically dry years. And so it's good to see this flip side of that. And so in addition to precipitation, we also had we took a lot of other components into effect, principally land use, evapotranspiration. We took a look at surface water supply, urban population growth rate. Basically, we collected just a plethora of data, both from state, federal, local sources. Basically worked with a lot of the local agencies to be able to quantify a lot of kind of the overall, what are the operations of the basin, and really what is that, and how does that affect the aquifer system overall? Next slide, please. So obviously, when it comes to Sigma, our major component that we're taking a look at is both going to be from an operational perspective, what is our groundwater production, and then how does that affect the overall health of the aquifer system? And so one of the things that we have to provide to the state is an estimate of groundwater pumping throughout the basin. And so in this past year, we saw approximately 370,000 acre feet of pumping, of which about 300 of that is going to be private agricultural production. This is going to be very heavily driven again by the amount of water that's available, both from precipitation, from surface water supply, and what is the overall demand, right? So we then supplement those water supplies, particularly in the West. We supplement a lot of those surface water supplies with some groundwater production, and then in the kind of the eastern parts of the basin, or where there's some of that water is not as plentiful, surface water supply is not as plentiful, we are relying entirely on groundwater. So that's going to be our major groundwater use within the basin. In addition to that, our private agricultural pumping, we also have some agency pumping. Both agricultural and urban agencies provided this data directly to the model. And that is going to be kind of on a per well basis, so distributed across the basin, kind of the spatial locations, the depth of pumping from those agencies. And you can see the kind of the combination of ag and urban agencies within the basin is about 65,000 acre feet. In addition to that, we also have about 5,000 of what we consider generally as de minimis or urban private use. So this is small well systems, individual landowners for domestic use. But the overall total groundwater production, again, as I said, is about 360,000 acre feet in 2023. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for the basin overall? There's a lot of information that kind of goes into this, but if I want to kind of summarize it all for you into one chart, this is kind of a representation of what we've looked at over the past 33 years or so. For Sigma, for our GSP, we initially developed the model looking at about the 25 years. And ever since then, in each of the 3 annual reports that we've had, we've extended the model effectively year after year. And so now we have a kind of a running total of all the dynamics that directly interact with our groundwater system. And so overall, you can see like the one that we directly extract groundwater, we see that 363,000 acre feet of pumping being kind of what is being pulled out of the groundwater system here in this gray color. Then in the inverse of that, what we are putting into our aquifer system is what you can see kind of the upper half of this chart. And so the first major component we see here is deep percolation. That is going to be a combination of percolation of precipitation. Particularly, that's why you're going to see it being much, much larger than some of the previous years. We have, as I said earlier, we had a lot of precipitations. We are the beneficiaries. A lot of that is percolated into our groundwater system to recharge our aquifer. But in addition to that 340,000 acre feet of deep percolation, we also see stream aquifer interaction. We have a lot more water in the river systems as we're kind of spilling it from the reservoirs down throughout not only the Tuolumne, but also the Merced, the San Joaquin River. Overall, all 3 of those rivers do a lot of we have a lot of contributions. We have 100,000 acre feet of stream contributions to our groundwater system. We have some canal recharge. This includes both to TID and MID's conveyance system, as well as Turlock Lake itself. So any seepage losses from any of those systems is combined to about 89,000 acre feet of recharge. And then the last couple 2 here can partially be combined. Net subsurface inflow is groundwater flow from our adjoining basins. So this is water moving from a combination of the Modesto, Merced, and Delta Mendota basins, kind of the net of those 3 basins. Within the Central Valley Aquifer of about 70,000 acre feet, and foothill inflow. This is what's coming from the east, effectively from the Sierra Nevadas into our groundwater system of about 11,000 acre feet. So, fortunately, I get to provide the benefit of this past year. We take all these hydrologic, all these operational conditions, combine them all together, and we can see a net change in storage of our aquifer system of about 250,000 acre feet. Next slide. And so the balance of that is actually one of the things that we have to provide to the state, to DWR as part of our annual report. We need to provide both an estimate for the spatial distribution of that change in storage, as well as the volumetric value by principal aquifer. So the subbasin is split up into 3 principal aquifers. We have what is above and below the Corcoran clay, what we call the western upper and the western lower principal aquifers, as well as the eastern principal aquifer. And so you can see here the combination of those 3 make up the 251,000 acre feet that we have overall. And you can see here on the left-hand side of this figure, the kind of the general spatial distribution of that change in storage. And so one of the couple things you can kind of see here in general is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stream aquifer interaction. A lot of that increased flow, it turns into increasing the water levels, the head in the streams, and then that is percolates into the groundwater system. And so we can see along the river systems, we see a lot of recharge from the stream system. Throughout the entire basin, we see a lot of percolation. But we do still want to point out that we do still have some areas that are, have declining water levels and declining storage. And you can see here that in both kind of like the grayish color is about equal, and then the orange here is continued decline over this past year. So overall, we can see a change in storage on a per acre basis. We see about a positive, about a foot gain or 0.7 feet of storage. And so that's, again, as I said earlier, much needed reprieve from the past few years. And so overall, we've seen a lot of recovery over this past, the very wet 2023 water year. Next slide. And that's when I'll pass it back to Liz.
Okay, thanks, Dominic. So as part of this annual report, we did an analysis of groundwater elevations and also compared groundwater elevations to sustainable management criteria. What we found was that in the fall of 2022, there were a significant number of minimum threshold exceedances throughout the subbasin. And then we also had some interim milestone exceedances. But keep in mind, the fall 2022 monitoring event occurred after 2 consecutive critically dry years, 2021, 2022. So these observed water level declines are not unexpected. The fall 2022 monitoring event is the first fall event that counts towards undesirable results. according to the definition in our GSP. But just based on this one event, undesirable results have not been triggered. In the spring, we definitely saw signs of water level recovery, but because the water levels were taken in early spring, they likely don't reflect the full effect of the wet year. And so we'll continue to keep our eye on the water levels. Next slide, please. Here's a groundwater elevation contour map that was in the annual report. This is from fall 2022, and it includes groundwater levels that were measured in the western upper and the eastern principal aquifers. Groundwater elevations, as shown here, range from about 36 feet in the west to almost 140 feet in the east. The center of the pumping depression, groundwater elevations reached a level of about 25 feet below sea level. In general, the flow patterns are similar to what we've seen in the past. There were no significant changes. We have flow towards the pumping depression in the eastern and central subbasin. There's a groundwater mound in the vicinity of Hillmar and Delhi, and there's flow to the west and northwest in the western subbasin. There is one well, the Northeast Storm Basin monitoring well, which is in the eastern principal aquifer, just east of the edge of the Corcoran Clay. That's screened pretty deep, and what we're seeing is that water levels at this well are pretty consistent with the western lower principal aquifer, and that's that little bullseye that you see right on the edge of the city of Turlock, right on the east of the Corcoran Clay boundary. Next slide, please. We also did a water quality analysis. So the constituents of concern for water quality that were defined in the GSP include arsenic, uranium, TCP, PCE, nitrate, and TDS. During water year 2023, there were 139 wells in the subbasin that were sampled for one or more of these constituents of concern. Most of these wells were municipal. There were a couple of domestic wells and about 11 monitoring wells at regulated facilities. We looked closely at the data and compared with past maximum values and the NCLs. And we saw that of these constituents of concern, nitrate and TDS are the only two that had new first-time NCL exceedances. And then we took another step and looked at their concentrations in relation to water levels in the area and at the RMWs. And we saw that, these were not, these new MCL exceedances were not being caused by GSA management activities. So that was the conclusion to our analysis. Next slide, please. We also did a subsidence analysis in this annual report. The map that you're looking at is INSAR data that's available on DWR's website from June 2015 to September 2023. And the areas with the greatest subsidence that you're seeing, kind of the brighter colors, the pinks and the reds, are consistent with a map that was shown in the GSP, which spans the period of about June 2015 to 2019. It's also consistent with what we've seen in the previous two annual reports. So there are two areas where we've seen some subsidence. The first is an area south and southwest of the city of Turlock. This area has expanded since 2015, and we've seen subsidence based on the INSAR data up to between 3 and about 3.5 inches. There's also an area east of Delhi near the edge of the Corcoran Clay that's expanded and increased in magnitude, and this area, the subsidence is up to about 4 inches. And also keep in mind that there is the INSAR margin of error is about plus or minus 0.7 inches, a little more than half an inch. And the area southwest of city of Turlock, you can see there's a little triangle. That's a GPS station, a Turlock GPS station. And if you go to the next slide, please. This is a chart of the data from that GPS station from 2013 to early 2024. And so the blue dots are the frequent data that it's collected at that station. And what you can see is it's sort of a short-term seasonal pattern, this up and down cyclic nature. And this is indicative of seasonal elastic subsidence. And this is on the magnitude of about 1 inch or less. So you have some subsidence and recovery, subsidence, recovery. So it's elastic. But overall, if you look at the red dots, these are annual averages. There's a long-term declining trend over these 10 years. For March 2013 to September 2023, this average annual net vertical displacement was about 0.16 feet, which is just slightly less than 2 inches. So this is the inelastic subsidence that's happening, this long-term trend. Next slide. Excuse me. Next slide, please. We also took a closer look east of Delhi, near the edge of the Corcoran Clay. This is a hydrograph of at monitoring well MW68A. This is a relatively new monitoring well that was installed in late 2021 with Prop 68 funding. And because it's so new, we only have a few measurements, 2 spring measurements, 2022 and 2023, and 1 fall measurement in 2022. And as you can see, I've also marked where the Corcoran Clay is at this location. Because this was a recently installed well, we have a very good log for it and know exactly where the Corcoran Clay is at this location. And the Corcoran Clay is at an elevation here between 27 and 39 feet. And what you can see is that in the 2 spring measurements, the groundwater elevations are below the top of the Corcoran Clay, just slightly below in the most recent spring 2023. And in the fall of 2022, the groundwater elevation that was measured is actually slightly below the bottom of the Corcoran Clay. So this shows us this is one of the areas where we've seen subsidence over time. And this, partially explains why. We're drawing down groundwater elevations below the top of the Corcoran Clay and the bottom of the Corcoran Clay at times. And it's causing most likely compression of the clay slightly. But sort of the overall big picture of this, we spoke with GWR about this. This is not, we're not seeing significant subsidence in the subbasin, but it's happening and we need to keep continuing to keep our eye on it. And so DWR's reaction to it was like I said, it's not significant. They didn't seem overly concerned, but we, as a subbasin, need to continue just to keep our eye on it. And next slide, I think that's it. Yeah, so thank you. Please let us know if you have any questions.
Pretty quiet in here. We're gonna move right along.
Ask one quick thing, just,
Yes,
I
yes,
mean, just
definitely.
from a, maybe an ignorant standpoint, how do we stand with other agencies around? In comparison, north and south?
In terms of
In terms of-
subsidence or other issues?
Well, just overall, I mean, if you compare subsidence as well as recharging and that kind of thing. I mean,
Maybe I'll jump out ahead of Liz, but probably much better than anyone further south of us in terms of subsidence. You see it more significantly in the Merced Basin, Los Banos area, and further south in the valley for sure. But we are seeing inklings of it here, and so we have to keep an eye on that. As Dominic showed, we added, I think, 250,000 acre feet to storage, which is significant. And again, that was a year ago. We've had another wet year, and we've got a full reservoir again this year. So I think you'll see that trend continuing, but usually that means another dry year is around the corner.
Hey.
I'm just, we're doing this long enough. So the key is when we get these good years like we do, let's maximize the resource, the surface water resource, and TID is working on some things to do that and recharge and little things like for you, the city of Turlock and the city of Ceres have just switched to the surface water supply. So I think Dominic showed groundwater pumping by public water by municipalities was 30,000 acre feet. That's just been cut in half starting last December. So little things like that are going to make a big difference and will start showing up in future annual reports. So it could be better, yes, but it could be a lot worse.
Michael, you might as well stay standing there unless there's any other questions on the annual report. None. We're right on the GSP revisions.
Yeah, so yeah, we've been very busy working on making revisions to the groundwater sustainability plan. As you remember, the DWR, Department of Water Resources, had two main issues. We have an overdraft they want to see addressed sooner rather than later. And they secondly want us to look at what are the impact of the overdraft to wells. And if there are an impact to wells and well users, how are we going to mitigate those impacts? So those are the two main issues. We've been meeting a lot with Department of Water Resources staff, which has been very useful. We've been assigned a case manager and even had a meeting with the deputy director. And their marching orders are very, very clear. We need to do everything we can to revise this GSP to stay out of the process, the probationary process with the State Water Board. If you follow the news further south in the valley, those people revised their GSPs that didn't meet muster. Now they're in a process with the State Water Board. It's very regulatory in nature. And so DWR is doing everything they can to help us revise our plan to meet the standards they think it'll pass. And basically, what does that mean? You know, their thing is we need to focus primarily on demand management, reduce pumping. We have a lot of programs to do recharge and conservation and other stuff. They're like, hey, that's great. But your foundational approach needs to be a reduction in pumping. And again, that reduction in pumping is primarily on the east side, and you saw some of the slides tonight. So as part of this presentation tonight, we're gonna have Liz talk about what we're doing, you know, overall in the sub-basin to do our well mitigation and well impact analysis. And they've invited Mike Tietze here. He's the manager for the East Turlock GSA. He can make a presentation on the program they're proposing to their growers to reduce pumping or put that pumping management plan in place. So if the basin does not recover, they can quickly go to reductions in pumping. Okay, so any questions before we start? Okay, I'll turn it over to Liz to get going.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so I will be tag teaming again with Dominic. I will start out. Next slide, please. Summarizing the work that we're doing for corrective action number 1. And corrective action number 1, as a reminder, and Michael just indicated, is DWR wants to know, we defined 2027 interim milestones in places in the subbasin that are below the MTs. And they'd like to know what the impact of lowering groundwater levels to those IMs may be on beneficial uses and users of groundwater. And so that includes a well impact analysis, well mitigation plan, and also an analysis of how that might affect other sustainability indicators. So first I want to talk about the well impacts analysis. So the goal of this is to try to estimate how many wells may go dry if groundwater elevations decline below the MT to the 2027 IM, where the 2027 IMs are defined below the MT. Next slide, please. So in order to do this, we compiled the database of all water supply wells with construction in the subbasin. This includes domestic, agricultural, municipal, and industrial wells. We've reviewed the wells that have construction, and we've spatially related these wells to the nearest representative monitoring well in each principal aquifer. And it's at these RMWs, the representative monitoring wells, where the MTs and IMs have been defined. So we're comparing these MTs and IMs to these wells that are in the database. Next slide, please. This is a map that shows the representative monitoring well locations. So the blue dots are all of the representative monitoring wells in the chronic lowering of groundwater level monitoring network. And the blue dots that have a green halo are the wells that have 2027 interim milestones that are below the MT. Most of the RMWs that have 2027 IMs below the MT are in the eastern principal aquifer, but there are 4 in the western principal aquifer. There's 1 in the western there's 1 in the western lower and 3 in the western upper. Next slide, please. So the database that we put together of existing well information with construction information includes almost 8,000 wells. This information comes from several sources. One is the GSP data management system that was compiled during GSP development. The second is from recent model updates since GSP was submitted a few years ago. And the third, the largest source of data, DWR's online well completion report database. And you can see all of these little dots on the map are all of the well locations that we have information for. Next slide, please. And the first thing that we did as part of this analysis is we estimated which wells would be projected dry at the minimum threshold. A well would be considered dry if the depth to the minimum threshold is below the total depth of the well. And the black dots that you see are those wells. There are a total of 208 wells with construction that went dry at the MT, which is the 2015 water level. And I know you're looking at this going, there's not 208 dots on this map, and that's because a lot of the locations that we get from Oscar are based on center of section. So there are a lot of well locations at each of these dots that you see that are center of section. But there are a total of 208 wells that went dry at the MT. And out of almost 8,000 wells, this is about 2.7% of the wells. Next slide, please. And then the next step is, well, what if the water levels decline below the MT to the IM in the areas at the wells where we have IMs below the MT? Well, similar to the MT analysis, a well is considered dry if the depth to the IM is below the total depth of the well. So if groundwater elevations are lowered from the MT to the IM, where the IM is below the MT, we have 85 additional wells that are at risk of being dry. And those are shown again as the black dots on this map. 85 additional wells out of almost 8,000 wells is a little over 1% of the wells in the subbasin with construction. Most of these, 81 out of the 85, are in the eastern principal aquifer. Next slide, please. So what are the attributes of these at-risk wells, these 85 wells? Well, fortunately, we know the age for most of them. And in general, the 85 impacted wells are generally older and shallower than the average well. So the average age for all wells is 32 years, but for these 85 wells that are impacted, almost 50. And the average depth for all of the wells in this database is about 230 feet. But for the 85 that have been impacted, about 140. So again, the wells that are vulnerable are shallower and older. Next slide, please. There are limitations to this analysis. One is that we have to use wells that have construction information. So it's limited to these wells, these well records that have construction information. There are some well records in Oscar's database that don't include construction information, and we can't include those in this analysis. There's also, like I said previously, there is some uncertainty associated with well location, since many of the wells in Oscar are located based on center of section. There's also, we don't know what the well status is. We have records of well construction from DWR, and some of them may be as old as 50, 60 years. We don't know if those wells are still active, but we have to assume that they are for this analysis. And also, we don't exactly know the well type. I mean, well types are indicated on the log at the time of construction, but they can be incorrect or may change over time. Next slide, please. So the next steps for corrective action number one is developing a well mitigation plan to address these 85 wells. And we've developed a draft plan, and we're working with the tax right now on that. And we're also working to evaluate effects on other sustainable management criteria, and that includes effects on subsidence, water quality, and interconnected surface water. So that's all I have. Next slide, please, and I will pass it off to Dominic. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Sure. I'm gonna have to excuse myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a night.
We'll have a quorum. We're in good shape.
Coming.
So over the next couple of slides, I'm hoping to talk to you about how we're addressing corrective action number two. So corrective action number two is predominantly driven on providing the GSAs with the tools to effectively guarantee sustainability. So within the GSP, we supplied several quality projects and management actions that would help arrest overdraft and return the basin and maintain the basin sustainability in a variety of hydrologic conditions. DWR is, as Michael pointed out at the beginning of this presentation, is DWR wants to see management actions in the forefront, and it's a primary tool used to guarantee sustainability, acknowledging certainly that we want to have to default to demand reduction or other management actions as a worst case scenario, as last case priority, but that we need the tool in the toolbox to kind of act as a backstop regardless of the conditions. And so the goal behind this is to be able to set up our management actions in a way that will empower the two GSAs to both act effectively and efficiently. In order to do this, we have to hope to outline a variety of triggers, impacts, for example, whether we are above or below minimum thresholds in localized conditions comparatively to the basin as a whole, and effectively pre-evaluate some of the conditions and contingencies that the basin has to make sure that we achieve sustainability regardless of the situation. Then, as I mentioned earlier, the goal of this is to first be able to have those management actions available, but to utilize as little of them as possible to be able to offset them with high yield projects. Next slide, please. So to kind of visualize this, what we're anticipating doing for this revised GSP is to effectively flip the priority of projects and management actions into what you see here. So initially, our goal was to provide effectively a lot of projects with high yield impacts to the basin, but to be able to mitigate and have as few management actions as possible, and to utilize adaptive management depending on the conditions that we have to implement these demand reduction or other strategies. The direction that we've been given by DWR effectively says that we need to put the management actions forward first. That they need to be that, effectively, as I said earlier, there needs to be that backstop, and that those management actions are then offset as available with projects depending on their implementation, yield, and available hydrology. Next slide, please. And then the other component to our corrective action number 2 is that DWR would like additional detail to be provided to them from a water budget component to additional guidance to describe how these projects and management actions will be implemented over time. Principally, particularly in the fact that the past couple of years and the previous 2 annual reports that were available prior to receiving these corrective actions were 2 critically dry years. Because of that, our overdraft was significantly higher than what you would consider an average year, or particularly in a wet year. And so because of that, we were asked to provide additional information as to how these projects and management actions will vary depending on the water year type, available hydrology, and the operations of the basin. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, we are effectively revising some of how we're doing some of the modeling, and to incorporate what we consider an implementation period as well as a sustainability period. So originally in the GSP, we were called to have a sustainable 50-year period that effectively assumed all projects that build out and to achieve sustainability based on those conditions. With that, we certainly know that the sustainable yield and PMA modeling that we've done shown that we were sustainable under a variety of conditions over that 50-year period, but that incorporated a lot of projects completely at build out. Our goal is to show that, to kind of build in an implementation period, effectively to show that while these projects come online, to be able to estimate what the conditions are. And so to do that, we've incorporated both the implementation schedule, effectively looking over the next 20 years, and to kind of build in those projects over time as they become available, as well as to consider a wide variety of hydrologic conditions over that period. For example, you know that with the past few years have been particularly dry up until 2023. And so because of that, we want to make sure that we have two conditions. The first one that we're evaluating is the 1999 through 2018, a very balanced hydrologic period. Comparatively, we also want to make sure that we are prepared and available to meet our sustainability goals, to meet our Sigma objectives, regardless of the hydrology. So in that case, we've looked at the 1987 to 2006 hydrologic period, which is a much drier period, with the 87 to 92 drought, a 7-year long-term drought, and so that we can make sure that we can plan accordingly and be able to effectively bookend our conditions with both the normalized hydrologic period as well as a very dry hydrologic period to give us an idea of what our options can do and effectively, as I said earlier, plan for worst case scenario and then be able to adapt to a better conditions. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, we've taken a plethora of projects that you can kind of see here, and we've broken them down into 5 modeling scenarios. So the first group that you can see here is effectively represented in scenario 1. We have what is considered group 1 projects. These are projects that are either already in place post GSP or are imminently scheduled to be online. So you see here, particularly as we brought up earlier, the Regional Surface Water Supply Project, which is bringing surface water supply to the cities of Turlock and Ceres, is being a major Group 1 project. As well, in addition to that, we also have the TID Ceres main regulating reservoir, estimated to have a yield of about 10,000 acre feet, as well as the Diane Storm Basin has a yield of about 400 acre feet, 450 acre feet per year. And so the goal of this is to create, scenario 1 is kind of our, what do we have available today? And then we build upon the yield of those projects, bringing additional water supply. We bring in demand reduction throughout the basin, particularly in the eastern parts of the basin, to achieve and evaluate sustainability. This is effectively what I was mentioning earlier as our kind of our worst case scenario with the minimal projects, but really focusing heavily on management actions. From there, between scenario 1 and scenario 5, we are building in the large variety of projects you can see here, both the projects from the West Turlock Subbasin GSA, as well as the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. Both GSAs are working extensively to bring both supply side projects, to bring demand management reduction, additional recharge into the basin to achieve sustainability, to really, as I said earlier, mitigate and to have as little demand reduction as necessary, but to be able to understand what it would take if any of these projects either are not, do not come online or are not available, or if our hydrology is inconsistent with the what we expect in the near future. Next slide, please. And so what you can kind of see here is a groundwater budget, similar to the one I presented a few minutes ago with looking at our annual report. This actually looks forward into the future. This is estimated based on hydrology, population growth, changes in land use, refinements in evapotranspiration, effectively estimating out one potential scenario, what the near future could look like. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we see the implementation period, which is a 20-year period between 2022 and 2042. That's effectively our Sigma designated implementation period, at which point we have a 50-year sustainability period that moves forward, that we have to achieve long-term sustainability. And so what you can effectively see here, particularly would draw your attention to the cumulative change in storage, which is the line that goes across this chart. Overall, we can see here that as we begin to implement projects, particularly across the first 20 years, based on the hydrology, we see a increase in water levels and groundwater storage as we continue to bring projects online, as we continue to implement, in this case, demand reduction, and to the point where we see in the 2042, that kind of starting period of what we're considering our sustainability conditions. At that point, we are, all of our projects, all of our management actions are online, they're active, and we are operating the basin in a means of sustainability. This is built into all those projects, assuming all those projects that I had on the previous slide, all of those are active. And so what we can see here, particularly in the long-term case, so if you look at the beginning to the end of the black line, you can see here that we are staying above effectively the zero change in storage, zero overdraft, which is our long-term goal. But within that, we certainly understand that there's going to be variability within our hydrologic conditions. So in wetter years, for example, like 2023, you're going to see growth positive change in storage. And in drier years and drought conditions, you can see kind of throughout this period, both for example, in the around water year 29, in this case, water year in the 39 through 45, for example, that's the 87 to 92 drought. And then again, in the 65 to 67, 68, 68th year, that's indicative of the 2013 to 2015 drought. So you can see that we're incorporating those components. So we don't, that the basin is operating in a way that not necessarily that this change in storage is a perfectly straight line, but that we can maintain our water levels above our minimum thresholds while accounting for fluctuations in hydrology, changes in climate, and things to that effect. And you can see that this black line is comparative to the dotted black line here, which is what you can see, which is the conditions if none of these projects are online. And we kind of operate the basin at a baseline level, or kind of as a business as usual. And so certainly from there, the yield of all those projects and management actions is the kind of the difference between those two black lines in the long-term horizon. Next slide, please. That should be it. So with that, that's effectively our plan. Some of our next steps for the modeling is when it comes to corrective action number 2 is to continue to work with the GSAs. We're continuing to refine some of the projects to be able to simulate those the best that we can. And the goal is to both then be able to document both the PMAs themselves, as well as incorporate what we've learned from our modeling into the GSP, so that we can basically prove to DWR not only that we have the ability to stay sustainable, but also to provide to them a commitment and a guarantee that this basin is being operated efficiently and sustainably.
Additional questions for Dominic or Liz?
Yeah, Alamo. So to follow up on that, Mike Teese is going to quickly go over the program on the East Turlock GSA. And I really want to thank Mike for coming. Here's the East Turlock guy coming into the West Turlock guys to talk about the program they're developing for demand management. If these programs and projects don't happen quickly enough, what do we do in the basin to react quickly to reduce pumping? So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Chair Alamo, directors, thank you very much for having me tonight. In some respects, I feel like this is long overdue. Michael invited me. I'll look to him for a signal. If you want me to come back, I'll come as often or as little as you want. I'm going to talk today about our overdraft reduction plan, which is the synthesis on what we've been working on and putting it into a concise, implementable, clear program to bring East Turlock Subbasin into sustainability. If you walk away with nothing else tonight other than that East Turlock Subbasin GSA is fully committed to using demand reduction as our primary and first tool for achieving sustainability, that's the message that I want to convey. And that's up to and including, and I've emphasized this in recent meetings, up to and including enforcement if we need to go there. We don't want to go there, but we will if we have to. We recognize that that's how we have to comply with SGMA. So first slide, please. So just a quick quote, I won't read it here, but essentially one of DWR's primary concerns with the GSP was that we were not clear enough on our projects and management actions and to allow staff to conclude that, yep, these guys have this, they have an exact plan for that we can determine that they will be in sustainability. So what we plan to do to address that deficiency is to develop an implementation plan that's primarily an ETS GSA implementation plan, because that's where the primary groundwater imbalance in the basin exists. It will be appended to the basin GSA. It will include opportunities for coordination and collaboration with WTS GSA, and then the tools will be available for adaptation should WTS GSA find that they would be useful or usable for its own purposes. But primarily it'll be an ETS GSA action plan. And it pulls together the projects and management actions that we've been working on since the GSP was submitted in 2022. And we plan to adopt it by resolution and append it to the GSP. Next slide, please. So we had a call with Shane, our contact with DWR, and we presented what we wanted to do to him. And the way that he put it is the GSAs chose sustainable management criteria that are high in elevation, and will be operating below them for some time. And turning around groundwater level trends is hard. So that's why they want to be sure that we have a solid plan for achieving that. And I want to emphasize that him saying that they're high, that's just him saying that, hey, you guys, this is your plan. You tell us how you're going to do it. Doesn't mean we set them wrong. I think we set them right. But that was one of the key walkaways that really got our attention. They liked the overdraft reduction plan approach, but said that we needed to make a clear and certain path to sustainability from our projects and management actions. He said modeling is fine, and we're doing modeling to demonstrate that we have tools that we think will get us there, but ultimately they're going to look at the monitoring data. And he said very clearly, if the monitoring data tell you something different than the modeling, he's not going to believe the modeling or be impressed by it. And we need to define an action plan with clear triggers, actions, and schedules, and to do that as precisely as we can, or if there's things that need more time to develop, to give them a specific action plan and timeline for getting to where we need to go. So the key here is that we're going to focus on demand reduction management actions. We will include projects, of course, but our primary effort, just by virtue of the water that we have available and of the fact that we're pumping primarily groundwater, needs to be demand reduction. So that's what the plan is really going to be focusing on. We will emphasize early action starting in this next fiscal year. We're setting aside a budget to begin. That'll be a more nominal budget. We recently passed our Prop 218 operational assessment. Yay. And so that really helps us to set aside a few $100,000 to deal with this in this fiscal year. And then we're working on a Prop 218 groundwater extraction fee that will provide a lot more income by which we can incentivize the demand reduction and implement the demand reduction management actions. So, but we're going to start early and then be implementation ready for the rest of it in 2025. Next slide. So the approach is a two-pronged strategy. In the upper left-hand corner, number one there in goldenrod is the demand reduction programs. And that includes, well, demand reduction, in this case, is net demand reduction. So it's the recharge projects that we can muster. Incentivized demand reduction. So that's either incentives to fallow land, or incentives that are part of our multi-benefit land repurposing program. The difference between the two is one looks for additional benefits, the other doesn't. It's quicker. But by their nature, both of those are voluntary, so they have to be backstopped by mandatory demand reduction. So we plan to have the policies in place to implement that as a backstop if we need it. So that's the engine. The carburetor and distributor, if you will, that's the blue box. That's the groundwater use management program. So that's a tiered allocation program with interim allowance to pump above the sustainable yield and ratcheting down incrementally over time until we pump at or below the sustainable yield. And we'll learn more about exactly what the sustainable yield is as we go, but we have a good target from the modeling that's been done to date. In order to manage that, so we'll set tiered extraction fees. The more you pump, the more you pay. And then the more money goes into being able to implement projects and management actions. We'll set pumping limits. We're developing a portal also that'll allow us to regulate pumping and get information out to ag pumpers. Everything will be informed by the monitoring data. The monitoring data will help us to periodically evaluate how we're doing and make course corrections, and that's the adaptive management program. So we're clear on the adaptive management program. One of the concerns was, well, maybe the adaptive management program looks like you're going to do as little as you can get away with. That is not what we're about with our adaptive management program. Our adaptive management program means we are ready to adapt to do more if we need to. If we have to do less, that's great, but the primary focus of adaptive management in our case is to be prepared to do more. Next slide, please. So this is kind of busy. I'll let you cogitate over it on your own time, but it shows the same goldenrod engine with net demand reduction on the left. Our recharge programs, multi-benefit land repurposing, land purchasing, or that's actually should say land retirement or pumping retirement program, and then GSA intervention. And then the various different tools that we have for implementing it in the upper right, the fee program, use management portal, and then we're developing policies, rules, and regulations, which turns out to be fairly hard work, but we're going through those details so that we'll have everything ready to go by the end of this year and can adopt our Prop 218 extraction fee. What I want to point you to on the bottom is the adaptive management framework. On the right side of that box, you see a cycle that basically says if the monitoring data tell you that you're on track with where you want to be, you just keep doing the same thing. It goes in circles, okay? But if it does not, if there's a threshold that's met, and we have those thresholds in this case identified as yellow, orange, and red, then you have a commensurate action and course correction to make sure that you get on track. And yellow is like an early indicator. That's like a course correction and investigation. Orange is something's going on that we don't like. We need targeted action to deal with it. Our subsidence area is one example of that. And red is, well, we got to stop. We have to, at this point, Sigma gives us the authority to regulate pumping. It gives us the authority to levy a $500 per acre foot fine or penalty if we need to. We don't want to go there. But I do mention it because it needs to be mentioned that we have that as a backstop. Okay, next slide, please. So this just shows the groundwater use management program and a tiered charge and demand reduction program over time that funds the other programs that are also implemented over time. And that timeline for implementation is what Dominic is simulating in his modeling, and some of those have not yet been evaluated, but we should know shortly if what we have here is predicted to get us there in terms of the hydrographs at specific wells. If it's not, then we'll adjust this and increase our expectation of what we do. Next slide, please. And this is just a timeline. Again, I won't go into a lot of details here, but the policies, rules, and regulations, groundwater use management portal, and Prop 218 fee, and the intervention policies are all, we're targeting the end of this year to have those in place so that we can adopt them by resolution, and we can begin, if we're successful with our fee, we can begin collecting that fee. Which then would come in through the county assessor's office, actually starting in January of 2026 for the 2025 extraction year. So there's a little bit of a lag time there that we have to make up for. But we're moving as quickly as we can to get additional funds in place. In the meantime, we do have a $9 million MLRP grant that will help to fund our land retirement or land repurposing aspirations in the interim, and we're setting aside a few $100,000 to get started. Next slide. So this shows in the MLRP program, our plan is scheduled for approval and adoption in early 2025, and then implementation by the middle of 2025 after the Department of Conservation approves it. Our land purchase or land retirement program, we plan to implement starting now on an ad hoc basis, and then we'll develop systematic policies as we go and learn more about how to implement that program. But we're going to start now, and same thing with our recharge project program. Next slide, please. So this is our first area of, it will be our first area of collaboration with WTS GSA. So we have an area of incipient subsidence. We want to get on top of it. So we are viewing that within ETS GSA as an area for priority action. The greatest subsidence actually is in a little area that's in ETS GSA. And, you know, I'm not saying that the responsibility divides at the boundary, but I am saying it's clear we have something that we need to take action on here. And so we plan to implement enhanced monitoring. We're going to install some monuments across that area and across the center of our cone of depression. We will have a land irrigation retirement program that we start to implement in that area. We've already identified some land that might be suitable for recharge, using either local water or potentially replenishment water if to the extent that can be made available. And then we will prioritize MLRP projects and recharge projects near those areas where there are interim milestone exceedances or in that subsidence area. And then we will have triggers for program escalation and enforcement of pumping restrictions that are implementable starting 2025. And this is just a graph that shows, you know, of the slide that showed the different projects and land repurposing strategies, how they'd be implemented over time. This is our estimate of what that would do to the net demand reduction. So assuming that we have, based on our modeling and our historical data, we have an average groundwater demand somewhere around 250,000 acre feet. Our sustainable yield comes out about 96,000 acre feet above that. Could be more, could be less. We'll learn more as we go. And you can see that what we're aiming to do is by about 2036, 37 to be below that sustainable yield. I want to emphasize something to you, which is that curve can go as low as it needs to go to meet our mutual objectives and in order to restore the storage that's necessary in the subbase. So, yeah, with that said, I'll open it up to questions.
Thanks for coming down, Mike. Looks like you guys have been busy out there on the east side, so.
I'm trying to stay on top of it. So we've got a good team. So, but thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. And whenever you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, you know, through Michael or yourself. I'm always available. All right. Thank you.
With that, if there's no other questions on the revisions, we'll move on to agenda item H5, public hearing date to consider adopting the revised Turlock Subbasin groundwater sustainability plan. Michael.
Yes, we do have to set a hearing date, and our recommendation is to set the hearing date of July 11th. I know Jennifer's already been polling board members to see if you're here. The plan is due July 16th. And so we will be down to the wire, but we think it's going to take us that long, but there will be plenty of review for the technical advisory committee to be comfortable with the plan. It should be done about a month before that for public review. So we should be done by mid-June, and we can all review that. And again, I'll be available to interface with you directly or indirectly before July 11th to explain what's going on, what the plan entails, to be in a good position. Sorry.
Our 180-day deadline is the 18th, you said, right?
Yeah, the 16th of July, 16th of July. So we'll have time. We'll, you know, what we will do is we'll even start maybe submitting the documents, have them ready to go. So once you do adopt it, we're not starting from scratch. But again, apologize for going down to the wire, but I think it's going to be time well spent. I think we'll be happy with the outcome in the end. So setting that date.
Okay. What's your pleasure on the resolution there? Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, go ahead and call the roll, please.
Director Bixel,
Yes.
alternate Director Casey,
Yes.
Director Crooker,
Yes.
alternate Director Lindo, Director Ochoa,
Yes.
and Chair Alamo.
Yes. Thank you. Agenda item I, any additional comments from any board member? Seeing none, we have one item for closed session. That's conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation. Entertain a motion for that. there a second? Properly moved and second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We will now adjourn into closed session.